Why is it a big deal that the abomination of desolation is in the movie Leave the World Behind? Because Jesus talks about this. When you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing where it ought not, let the reader understand, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. It's important to recognize when this happens, when you see the abomination of desolation standing where it ought not. Let's look at where it's reflected in the movie. This is the scene in the middle of the movie that doesn't seem to have anything to do with anything else. Ruth enters this room with this key, and the picture they paint in the movie is a very similar picture to the way the abomination that causes God to leave the temple in Ezekiel chapter 8. Desolate can mean a couple different things, but one of them is nothing there, left desolate. Son of man, do you see what they are doing, the great abominations that the house of Israel commits here to make me go far away from my sanctuary? As we know in the New Testament, the sanctuary is our body. Jesus said that the temple is our bodies, his body. We are his body. This picture here reminds me of a black soul, a person where there is no light. The Lord is not there. He has left, leaving that person desolate. Here's the view of Ruth sitting in the chair, blowing the smoke up into the air. Verse 9, and he said to me, go in and see the wicked abominations which they are doing there, and all the idols of the house of Israel portrayed all around on the walls. And in their midst stood the son of Shaphan. Each man had a censer in his hand, and a thick cloud of incense went up. That cloud of incense. Then he said to me, Son of man, have you seen what the elders of the house of Israel do in the dark, every man in the room of his idols? For they say, the Lord does not see us. The Lord has forsaken the land. The idols portrayed around the walls, the thick cloud of incense going up, the dark room, and the room of their idols. Pictures just represent what we see in the verse. This is one definition of an idol, the worship of false gods, which is really anything that comes between you and the Lord. Even things like unforgiveness, sadness, worry, which of course Jesus forgives if we have a heart of repentance about it. But if we refuse to agree that it is sin, we are unrepentant. We have to at least bring that thing to the Lord and ask him for his help, agree that it is sin in order to be forgiven and changed. Goes directly from that scene to this scene where G.H. shows up at the Huxley house. Huxley was a writer and a philosopher. He wrote the book A Brave New World. He was an agnostic, but Thomas Huxley, a different person, coined the term agnostic. So he arrives at the house, the door is ajar, it's open, it's allowing anything in that wants to come in. I did another video about GH representing the Antichrist in this movie. It's this video right here. Just be aware of that for the rest of the conversation. The abomination of desolation. I don't know that it is just one thing, but I do believe that there is a specific one thing that is a physical representation, meaning based on what we just read in Ezekiel, there are things that, choices we can make, things we can do that in their extreme, unrepentant form, the Lord leaves our bodies. Let's say we don't believe in him anymore. That would be an extreme. But I believe the thing over the last 3 years that people put into their bodies is a physical choice. It's a choice that changed our bodies in the sense that we are God's creation. We put that into our bodies. It impacts our DNA. We are no longer as he created us. Satan can't create in and of himself from nothing, but he can manipulate God's creation. People made the choice to put that into their bodies. I know many would say it wasn't really a choice, they were forced, but ultimately it was a choice. And I don't want to say that without saying that I do believe that God can deliver from it, because he can do anything. I do believe that through repentance of taking it and prayer, that there is deliverance. And I believe even some verses we're going to talk about in a minute even point to that. I can't say one without saying the other. I believe that what it does do is opens the door for the enemy. And that, I think, this right here, I think, is a picture of that. Hello, anyone home? It's GH. I let myself in. And right before this, there was the open door. The door was open to this house. And as I mentioned, I believe this house represents the desolate house, the unsaved house, which I have another video actually talking about the three groups that talks about this house representing the unsaved house. The title of that video is Revelation 16:19. The door being open and the enemy being able to enter, and by enemy, demonic forces. This is a picture of that. This is 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Let no one deceive you by any means, for the day will not come until the falling away comes first, and the man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Remember, the temple of God is our bodies. When GH gets into the house, it has already been flooded, and there's this strange view. You see the 6 windows. It's kind of from the ground up view. Everything's knocked over in the house. George goes to locate the satellite phone. It represents prayer. The satellite phone is outside in the garage in this container, not used. And then when he holds the handset up towards the satellite, later in the movie they talk about how that's all you should have to do to be able to use it, is point it to the sky. But this one is unable to connect. He walks through the house into the back. The house is on the ocean, and he sees a watch. He grabs the watch with a 1 o'clock on it, and it's attached to a shortened arm. Here's a view of the desolation of everything strewn everywhere. And this was caused by a plane crash. Then they show him, a plane is heading towards him. They show him running across the yard, and you can see the water flooding in, and it breaks through the windows, and the flood hits him. This scene here is after he has driven back to his house. They're talking about how he's still soaking wet. He lies and says that he fell into the pool. Might this be the pool that represents the lake of fire? Most movies, when somebody is wet, they come out of the water. 5 seconds later, they're dry. But in this movie, they make a point that he's still wet. He drives all the way back to the house wet in there. And I think that is because the flood hit him. And that will relate to the verse that we're going to talk about. Here's where I want to stop and talk a minute about Abomination of Desolation. We already talked about how the thing provided a doorway. Read these verses in light of that. The people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary being the temple or our bodies. The end of it shall be with a flood. And remember the flood coming in through the windows of the house as GH is running away from the beach. He runs into the house, and then the flood comes into the windows. Until the end of the war, desolations are determined. Verse 27, then he shall confirm a covenant. And the word covenant here means, in the sense of cutting, a compact, because made by passing between pieces of flesh. Think of the thing passing between pieces of flesh, with many for 1 week. But in the middle of the week he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering. This part, confirming a covenant, that is an agreement. Though it's made by passing between the flesh, it is a compact, a covenant, an alliance. You do something for him. You receive that, it promises to protect you, which of course we know that it really doesn't. With many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering. Sacrifice and offering, as believers, we are always walking in sacrifice and offering. Jesus was the ultimate sacrifice, obviously, but through him we sacrifice our flesh as we walk with him. We give him our anger, our unforgiveness, our sacrifice of praise. There are all kinds of different sacrifices that we give to the Lord through Jesus. Ultimately, that will be impacted by the fact that the enemy has a foothold, a physical foothold. And on the wing or overspreading of abominations, detested thing causing horror. I just added what those definitions are. The King James uses the word overspreading. The New King James uses the word on the wing of abominations. In the movie, during this scene of the flood, the plane is what crashes into the beach and causes the flood. On the wing, the plane represents the wing or the overspreading. Overspreading of abominations. So if we think of the things that are offensive to God, I think it's easy to see how there is an overspreading of abomination in our world right now. But just taking the thing alone, the fact that that was given to over half of the world, record time, and that is the first time in history something like that has ever happened in that amount of time. And that should be a clue right there of the times that we're in. Overspreading of abominations, detested thing causing horror. That's pretty easy to see, especially when you think of, we talked about up here, that it allows, and that's just in the spiritual. Then you can look at it, the horror in the physical. I'll be one who makes desolate the one causing the horror, meaning the Antichrist being at the head of it all, but ultimately it is Satan and his cohorts and their impact over the entire world, even until the consummation. The definition of that is complete destruction, consummation, annihilation, almost always by God. Until the consummation, which is determined, is poured out on the desolate or on the one causing horror. Remember, GH is running into the house and the flood catches up to him and he is soaking wet. So it's poured out on the desolate or the one causing horror. That's represented by the end of it shall be with a flood. In the movie, it's represented as a flood. Speaking of the flood, it does also say, giving of both the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot. And he said to me, for 2,300 days, then the sanctuary shall be cleansed. I think that flood that assumes the Antichrist, the end, that judgment on the Antichrist, at the same time is where the sanctuary will be cleansed. The sanctuary, the temple, will be cleansed. I think that God has something planned that and he also says that the kingdom will be handed over to the saints in the end. There's a lot more going on there at the end where the Antichrist is judged and the temple is cleansed. The kingdom is handed over to the saints. I don't know what he has planned exactly, but it looks exciting. And to me, the fact that it's cleansed means that there is definitely hope for those that got the thing. I also did a video on Jesus showing up in the movie, and that's this one.